Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. England students' GCSE and A-level results this year will be decided by teachers. Masks in the classroom are voluntary. Schools won't be forcing students to wear masks. And a counter-terrorism watchdog calls for a new legal framework to tackle the threat of radicalization. This year's GCSEs and A-levels grades are to be decided by teachers, and no algorithm will be used. But an education think tank warns of high-grade inflation. NTD's Rhodes has the story.
Education Secretary Gavin Williamson confirms that teachers can determine students' grades by using a combination of mock exams, coursework and essays.
This year's students will receive grades determined by their teachers, with assessments covering what they were taught and not what they have missed.
Last year, exam results were in chaos after the government used algorithms to adjust teachers' assessments. This year, they've learned their lesson.
I can confirm that no algorithm will be used for this process. Grades will be awarded on the basis of teachers' judgment and will only ever be changed by human intervention.
If students are unhappy with teachers' assessments, they can appeal. If students want to take written tests, there will be an option of exams in the autumn. There will also be optional mini-exams helping inform teachers' judgment.
By doing this, combined with a rigorous quality assurance process, are just two of the ways this system will ensure grades are fair and consistent.
Think tank, the Education Policy Institute, warns, without robust mechanisms in place which anchor overall results at a level consistent with previous years, there is a danger that the value and credibility of this year's grades are seriously undermined. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
There are calls to ease England out of lockdown sooner. A group of Conservative MPs believe Boris Johnson's roadmap is a bit too cautious. Here's NTD's Jane Worrell with the story.
Many of us are counting down the days to the next time we can go to the pub or visit friends and relatives in their home. There's a sense it might come soon after the Prime Minister revealed England's 4-stage plan out of lockdown, with at least 5 weeks in between each stage.
But some Conservative MPs want to open up the country sooner because infection rates are falling. They're part of the COVID recovery group, which is sceptical of lockdowns.
Earlier, the influential chair of Conservative backbenchers told us the roadmap is a positive step forward, but slower than what many would have liked.
What they don't do is accept that if the data is going in the right way more quickly, that you could bring these stages forward.
What do you think should be done next going forward?
Well, we are still seeing, and I hope it will continue, we're seeing a rapid fall in COVID positive test results, hospital admissions and deaths. This is something that's going on not just in the United Kingdom, it's going on in other countries, and we see evidence, whether it be different states in the United States or different European countries, which have pursued very different policies in terms of the types or levels of restrictions, and mostly are seeing broadly the same pattern of the decline of COVID, which might suggest there's a significant seasonal effect in play at the moment.
He says it's time to see more freedoms given back to constituents and hailed the UK's vaccine rollout. Mark Harper, who leads the COVID recovery group with Steve Baker, has called for a speedier exit out of lockdown. He said the government's model is based on dodgy assumptions. But Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's question time urged the Prime Minister to have a word with lockdown sceptic MPs. The first stage of lockdown is scheduled to lift on March the 8th, with schools reopening. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
The government said on Wednesday night that children are under no obligation to wear face masks and that schools can't punish them if they refuse to wear one. NTD's Marianne Leatham reports.
Earlier this week, Boris Johnson announced that secondary school pupils will have to wear face masks in classrooms if it's not possible for them to socially distance. Pupils are asked to take 4 lateral flow tests. During the first fortnight of school, 3 tests at school and 1 test at home, and to take a further 2 home tests a week, reporting all results to teachers. Ministers say both measures are now voluntary and pupils mustn't be kicked out of classes for refusing. Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, says the wearing of face coverings is advised in secondary school classrooms and in higher education. He says there will be a review at Easter. Mary-Ann Leatham, NTD News.
One of the UK's largest care home operators brings in a no jab, no job policy for new staff. A spokesperson for Care UK told The Guardian everyone applying for a role which requires them to go into a home will be expected to have been vaccinated before they start work. Care UK runs more than 100 homes. Over 2/3 of its staff have been so far vaccinated. Barchester Healthcare, which runs more than 220 private care homes, and Pimlico Plumbers have recently introduced similar policies. The Justice Secretary last Wednesday told ITV that requiring vaccination may be legal for new contracts. The Commission for Countering Extremism says there's a gaping chasm in the law. It called for a new legal framework to tackle the threat of radicalisation. NTD's Elle Rhodes explains.
The watchdog warned on Wednesday extremists can proactively glorify terror, openly spread anti-democratic ideologies and radicalise others online, yet still stay within the law. Sir Mark Rowley, former head of counterintelligence policing and the report's co-author, says laws have failed to keep pace with the evolved threat of modern-day extremism, and current legal boundaries allow extremists to operate with impunity. Counter-terrorism expert Will Geddes told the Epoch Times that during the pandemic, terrorist groups haven't been able to operate as they normally do. But one of their mainstays is to try to recruit people to their cause.
And this particular report addresses how certain materials can be promoted online almost lawfully as it's currently set within the legal parameters available to us, which could potentially be utilised as those recruitment tools.
Geddes praised the report, titled Operating with Impunity, for navigating the ambiguities of defining what is direct incitement and radicalisation. Terrorism think tank researcher Matthew Dryden welcomed the review's attempt to tackle gaps in the current law.
So I think the report is looking at ways to close some of those loopholes that currently exist that allow the preaching, for example, or the spreading of extremist or terrorist propaganda without legal ramifications.
Both Geddes and Dryden identified a need for social media to be on board in the fight against extremism online. Lead Commissioner Sarah Khan says, "This is a threat to our civilised democratic order, which cannot be taken for granted and requires a robust, necessary and proportionate legal response." Elle Rhodes, NTD News.
Coming up, 29 million smartphone owners in the UK may be entitled to £480 million in compensation. Find out more after the break. Delays importing and exporting goods to and from the EU have increased since Brexit. That's according to a survey by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Almost 2/3 of 350 supply chain managers say they experienced delays of at least 2 to 3 days getting goods into the UK. 44% experienced similar delays getting goods into the EU. The Institute says the main reason is the time taken for customs to deal with the new paperwork. And in a global first, Australia can now force Facebook and Google to pay for news content. A new law is seen as a compromise between the government and the tech giants. NTD's Eddie Aitken has the latest.
Australia can now make Facebook and Google pay news publishers. The Australian Parliament passed a law on Thursday that is designed to help struggling journalism.
Well, it's world-first legislation that places a legislative safety net under negotiations between the tech platforms who have been found to be advertising monopolies and media players across Australia.
For Facebook, the law reflects a, quote, fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between Facebook and news publishers, and the company says it will largely benefit big publishers.
Clearly, the larger media companies will be the initial beneficiaries of negotiations to effectively avoid the arbitration provisions in the code. Time will tell whether smaller players get access to significant funds.
Lawmakers watered down the law following a standoff. Facebook last week blocked all Australian news content on its platform, and Google threatened to pull its search engine altogether. The amended version allows the tech giants to avoid government intervention and incentivizes them to negotiate payment deals directly with news organizations. Both Facebook and Google have announced deals with Australian media companies recently. The UK and other countries are considering a similar law. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Facebook says it'll invest at least $1 billion in the news industry over the next 3 years. Facebook says it's invested $600 million in the news industry since 2018. It also says it's negotiating with German and French publishers to pay for content. About 29 million people in the UK may be entitled to compensation for around £480 million. That's especially Apple and Samsung phone owners, according to consumer watchdog Which. NTD's Marianne Leatham has more.
Which alleges that chipmaker Qualcomm breached UK competition law by taking advantage of its dominance. It claims that Qualcomm charged inflated fees to smartphone manufacturers, and the manufacturers then passed the costs to customers. Which is stating a collective opt-out lawsuit against Qualcomm. It says if the action is successful, anyone who bought an Apple or Samsung smartphone in the UK on or after the 1st of October 2015 can make a claim. They may be due a payout from £5 to £30, depending on what and how many devices they bought. Chief Executive of Which, Annabelle Hoult, says Qualcomm's practices are anti-competitive and have so far taken around $480 million from UK consumers' pockets, stating, "This needs to stop. Qualcomm is one of the world's biggest mobile phone chip producers, and it is facing a series of anti-competitive allegations. It was fined over £1 billion by the EU in 2 separate investigations and is appealing against both findings." Marianne Leatham, NTD News.
Researchers at the University of Lille are developing a portable CCP virus test that plugs into smartphones. They say it can produce results faster and more accurately.
Researchers at the University of Lille in France are developing a new portable COVID test that could provide results in just 10 minutes. The prototype Core Dial 1 test is the size of a large USB stick and can be plugged into a smartphone. Professor Sabine Suneritz explains.
Somebody has to take a nasal swab of you. You will put directly the sample of the electrode. You can put the telephone on the table, you can have a coffee, ice cream, you can have a shower. 10 minutes later you come back.
The test works by using tiny antibody particles from the cumelids, an animal family which includes llamas, camels and alpacas. The nanobodies are grafted onto the surface of an electrode. When they come into contact with the COVID-19 virus spike protein, the change in electrical current shows up as a signal on a graph on your phone.
You start your mobile phone and a signal will occur, and depending on the height of the signal, you can say if you're COVID positive and negative.
Other quick and portable COVID-19 tests also exist, but some scientists have raised doubts about their reliability. The Core Dial 1 test is yet to be approved for use, but initial trials show a 90% success rate compared to the trusted PCR tests, which take longer to deliver results and need lab conditions. The next phase of the project is to run a 3-month trial on more than 1,000 people before manufacturing the device.
Up next, the Liberal Democrats leader talks about his call for a boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. That and more when we return. In the face of accusations of genocide in Xinjiang, China, more and more voices are calling for a boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. We spoke with Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey about his efforts to convince the UK government and the athletic community. NTD's Eddie Aitken has a story.
Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey says the UK should take a lead in boycotting the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics over human rights abuses in Xinjiang, China.
And we're talking about forced labour camps, we're talking about systematic rape and sterilisation of women, we're talking about the separation of families.
On Wednesday, Davey asked the Prime Minister whether the government would support a boycott unless China ends this genocide.
We're leading international action in the UN to hold China to account, and we'll continue to work with the US, friends and partners around the world to do just that. He raises a point about a sporting boycott. We're not normally in favour of sporting boycotts in this country, Mr. Speaker, and that's been the long-standing position of this government.
The UN estimates that up to 1 million Uyghur Muslims are incarcerated in camps in Xinjiang. Johnson has refused to follow the US in declaring Beijing's abuse of Uyghurs a genocide.
So I really think this is a moment that we in Britain and around the world, we have to stand up and have to say that we know what's going on and we will do everything in our power to stop it.
Davey wrote to the British Olympic Association. BOA said it fully supported the Prime Minister's position. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab last year said a boycott is a possibility. This month, in direct response to Davey's move, the editor-in-chief of the CCP-controlled Global Times tweeted that countries boycotting the Games would face sanctions. The UK has taken steps to address the human rights situation in Xinjiang. Last month, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab announced a series of measures to prevent companies from being complicit in violations against Uyghurs.
And I would just remind people what happened back in 1936 at the Olympics in Munich. The British Olympics team went to that 1936 Olympics. They actually did the Nazi salute. And that's always been a stain.
The calls for a boycott are growing globally. A coalition of 180 human rights groups of Tibetans, Uyghurs, Inner Mongolians, Hong Kongers and others this month are also urging a boycott, and some are calling to rebid the Games. Several US senators in Canada's main opposition party are urging its government to pressure the Olympic Committee to move the Games to a different city unless the CCP changes course. Davey said next he's going to write to sponsors of Team GB, asking them to reconsider. He says this needs to be a huge effort. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Could this be the end for the big top in France? Traditional French circuses are now facing extinction. One circus owner explains why. Trevor Piper has the story.
Once a firm favourite among French children, the French animal circus may become a relic of the past. First lockdowns, now a new law sets to stop the show.
The announcements of Madam Minister are arbitrary for us, so we might lose our animals, our professions, our structures, but also our traditions. We are very afraid of this, something that's very arbitrary.
It would ban wild animals in travelling circuses on grounds of animal welfare. All of Cirque Royale's animals were born in captivity. In this family circus, daughter Cassandra has performed all her life. She says she'd be lost without the animals.
I don't see a circus without animals. For me, it's impossible. I grew up with them. All the animals for me are part of our family. The hippopotamus is the same age as my brother, and I grew up with him. And so it's true that taking our lives away from us will be the most difficult part, if this actually passes.
Parked on a plot of land in southern France, they haven't performed in months. The big cats confined to their pens and their main tent packed up.
We are the basis of culture. We're usually the first show one sees in their life. We go to the circus before we can go to the theatre or the cinema, so it's important that circuses perpetuate this entire tradition that is French.
Animals are a common sight in French circuses, but this could spell their end. If approved, the ban will be phased in over 5 years. Trevor Piper, NTD News.
As the demand for pets surges, while more people are working from home, so is the illegal dog trade from Eastern Europe into Germany. Emily Weather reports.
The dogs here are being sold by an illegal trader. As the demand for furry companions rises while Germans are told to work from home, so is the illegal dog trade from Eastern Europe into the country. Carsten Plucker runs a dog shelter and says the surge in demand for pets is putting an extra burden on shelters.
There have been mafia-style goings-on in the puppy trade for a long time now. Large gangs bring the dogs into Germany from Eastern Europe to sell them here. And on top of this are now private individuals who bring dogs in from Eastern Europe and are also selling them here.
He explains it's the shelters who are often carrying the costs for treatment and quarantining of any illegal dogs found. Plucker warns the black market trade is not only damaging to the dogs, but can create unforeseen costs for unsuspecting buyers, who may end up with hefty vet bills for dogs with hidden illnesses. Prices for certain dogs have also risen significantly, with Dachshunds going for €3,000 in some cases compared with €1,000 a year ago. Animal welfare groups are urging Germans to make sure that they are buying from a trusted source. They have also issued a plea that a dog is for life, not just for lockdown.
Social media is often the place for young people, but an 81-year-old German grandma is taking it by storm with her love of fitness. NTD's Lorraine Ferrier has more.
Nicknamed Fitness Gran, Erika Rishko isn't letting the virus get to her. Since last spring, she has uploaded more than 100 videos of herself doing exercises to encourage others to remain active during lockdown.
Especially dancing is something I think we should do much more of.
In some of her clips, she trains by herself and takes on fitness challenges set by people who are decades younger than her. In others, she and her husband do synchronised dance routines.
Super! It's super, just great. I am super happy about it. I have never been as confident about myself as I am at the moment.
She has over 120,000 followers and more than 2 million likes on her account. She is especially encouraged by young people's comments.
When these young people write to us and tell us they think we are great, asking, how do you do it? It's really motivating. It's just great.
Rishko lives in Langenfeld, a city in West Germany, and even the mayor finds her story so encouraging. Lorraine Ferrier, NTD News.
That's the news for today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees.